And thank you very much for joining us for our dispatcher operator training here from the Alaska Land Mobile Radio System. This training is designed to give dispatch operators some of the technical overview of how the ALMR system works, and by extension, how to best use the system to support your first responders. Keep in mind that different variations of policy and procedure with different agencies may have some different impacts. The screens may look a little bit different in these examples. Your procedures may vary. So certainly feel free to reach out if you need clarification. Also encourage folks to reach out to the supervision at your agency. But we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the technical aspects of the system, how it's designed, how it's governed. We're going to talk about some of the common functions of your dispatch consoles using the Motorola MCC dispatch consoles, which a lot of our centers have, and also review some reporting information. You see issues and some of those things in the system, how to report that back to us, and what kind of support you can expect. So this training is designed for both folks that are new and those that have had really been a lot of previous experience with dispatching and other telecommunications. So we're trying to serve everybody and provide a wide range of both technical issues as well as maybe some reminders of some basic operations. If you have questions during the training, we are going to provide a question and answer session at the end of this. You can also put questions in chat. We'll try and keep an eye on that as well. But certainly we'll get to them by the end of the meeting if we don't get to them through the different sections. So before we continue, I just want to introduce some of the ALMR staff that are on the training and will be available for questions. We have Ms. Sherry Schaefer and Mr. Travis Conant and myself. My name is Dan Nelson. So thanks very much again for joining us, and we'll get started. And I wanted to get started a little bit with just some basic terminology. And I feel that sometimes technical folks like myself, we tend to use a lot of terminology, a lot of different things. We kind of just assume everybody will understand them. So before we get too much into this, here are some terms that you're going to see in our training this morning. I'm going to start with P25. P25 is Project 25. That's a project that was created by APCO many, many years ago now, but it's basically a standard, a technical standard set for radio systems, including ALMR. So ALMR is what we call a P25 or Project 25 compliant radio system. A talk group is kind of like a channel or kind of like a frequency, but it's virtual in the system. And I'm going to explain that in just a second. But a talk group is typically, as most of you are familiar, assigned to a specific agency or a specific use, but there's also interoperable talk groups and some common shared ones as well. When we talk about a master site, there's some control points for ALMR throughout the state that really create the backbone of the system. Now we'll talk about master sites as well. A subscriber unit is kind of our technical term for a radio or some other device that's being used by a first responder. We don't typically say subscriber unit for a dispatch console because they're usually interconnected a little bit differently, but you can think of a subscriber unit basically as a radio, as opposed to a master site. When we talk about a site, that's typically an individual ALMR site that may be located throughout the state. A-WARN is the Anchorage Wide Area Radio Network, which is specifically designed based on the municipality of Anchorage's operations. We won't be talking too much about their specifics, but know that that is actually a part of the ALMR system, although a lot of that is managed separately by the municipality, but you may hear the acronym A-WARN from time to time. A radio alias, this you'll see often come up on your dispatch consoles. That's a nickname or an alias for the radio. Most of the time, in fact, all the time, those aliases start with your agency identifier. So something like AST or MSB or something that's been assigned by the system, and then it'll have maybe a name, maybe an ID number, or maybe an apparatus number or a vehicle number. It depends how your agency has decided to administer those aliases. The radio ID is simply a numeric ID number that tracks that radio and follows that throughout the system. And I'm going to show a visual demonstration of that in just a moment. And then finally, when we talk about affiliation, we'll get into that as well. But affiliation is where a radio or a subscriber unit is talking to an ALMR site and either registering on the system for the first time, such as when the radio's been turned on, or something has changed, like the radio's moved to a different site. So just some basic terminology to start a morning off. And I want to first go into just some basic radio system concepts. And these slides I borrowed from somebody else, so certainly appreciate that. But let's go into just a couple terminology and a couple visual illustrations for things. So,
hey Dan, this is Travis.
Go ahead, Travis.
Hey, are you sharing your screen? Because I'm not seeing any of the presentation.
I am sharing my screen, and we'll make sure that are others able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, Sherry can see that, and I asked somebody else if they can, or if that's just on Travis's side.
I can only see half the screen.
Okay. Let me see if I'm going to stop presenting here for a moment and reload this and see if that will work. So give me just a moment, if you would, please. All right, and Travis, how's that? Can you see that at all?
I still don't see anything, so I'm checking right now to see if it's something I have set up. Can anybody else see it?
I can see it.
I'm still only getting half the screen.
About half the screen. And I'm not sure why that is, because I can't change how this presents. So what we can certainly do here is if there are some folks that can see half of that, or Travis, if you can't see it, we can send this presentation out. I do have it as a PDF version that'll go through email. So I'll ask folks to bear with me, and I'll try and narrate as best I can along with the visuals, so we can make that work. Appreciate the patience with technical things. Teams, I will admit, is not my strong suit sometimes. So we'll continue on with that. So when we talk about some of the concepts of radios and how radio systems are built, there's basically three main types of radio transmission that I'm going to talk about. And I'm not going to belabor this, but I just want to share this briefly so we're familiar with the terminology. A lot of people have heard this before. When we talk in the conventional world and we talk about simplex radio, basically simplex radio is talking radio to radio without any infrastructure. So if you can see the graphic here, we have the portable radio in the center. When it transmits out, it can hit different radios as well as any different base stations. So that radio talks directly to a radio, whether it's another portable, whether it's a mobile radio that's mounted inside a vehicle, or whether it's a base station at a place, maybe perhaps like a fire station. That has very limited range, obviously, because it's dealing with just the power that you're using for the individual radio. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that variation a little bit later when we talk about coverage. But typically, simplex is used for tactical operations or maybe events, very short range, very small operating area. Now, generally, most of our agencies in day-to-day use probably don't use simplex very often, but it still definitely has a place in communications planning. So I wanted to share that with you. And oftentimes when trying to get off the main system, or maybe a side or tactical conversation has to happen, simplex may be used. So before ALMR came through with the big P25 system, a lot of folks, and many still do, use a conventional system using repeaters. And when we talk about conventional, you may also be familiar with the word legacy. Typically that talks about things that are more analog. ALMR and P25 is a digital standard. But conventional systems are typically analog, although they certainly can be digital, where they use a repeater. And a repeater is a unit, and it's usually up on a hill, a mountain, a tall building, someplace like that, that receives signals from a radio and then retransmits it out in a larger area. So your radio has to simply talk to the antenna that hopefully is getting much better coverage because of where it's located, and then being able to broadcast that to a wider area using the power of the repeater, which is using significantly more power than the radio. So a radio transmits to a repeater, and then it broadcasts back out to portables, mobiles, wherever that may be. Typically in a dispatch environment, we're using repeaters because our dispatch centers may be significantly distant from where our field units actually are. So finally, when we get into trunking, that's how ALMR works. So a trunked radio system is a little bit different, where you might have, perhaps 15, 20 years ago, maybe you had a police department repeater or a fire department repeater or perhaps a public works repeater. They're all doing one thing. So fire department, police, etc. When we're talking about a trunked system, it varies because instead of having all of that infrastructure for one agency, like your police department or your public works, you're using the system for basically the entirety of the users, and it works a little bit differently. So I just want to go through kind of a little example here real quick. So if we have this portable radio and it turns on, and it's basically telling the system that this is the radio and this is the talk group that I'm on. And if you can see the visual, you'll see this is radio with this particular number. That's that radio ID number. And it's on talk group with this ID number. Usually on our consoles and our radios, of course, we never see those ID numbers for talk groups, but that's how they're built in the system. So this radio turns on. It tells the site that this is the talk group I'm tuned to. This is my ID, and that's that affiliation. So when I do the press to talk on that talk group, again, I get that chirp, what we call that talk permit tone, and that's again talking to the system. My radio wants to talk on this particular talk group. And the system will come back and will say, all right, use channel X. And what that's really saying, this is a little bit confusing on this visual. I didn't have a chance to change it, but what this is really doing is really telling the radio, all right, this is the frequency that you're using. So this is the actual part of the radio frequency that I'm assigning you to talk on this talk group. And in the trunking world, we'll call that maybe a channel. So when we talk about sites that have 3 channels or 5 channels or more, that's taking up one of those channels. This is all done digitally. This is basically, if you're familiar with internet or packet technology, this is basically all data packets going back and forth. And that's where we call that a digital system rather than analog that's just broadcasting voice out. So in a networked trunk system, again, where ALMR is, let's look at this visual. So we have a radio that's tuned to a particular site, so site number 1, on this particular talk group with this radio ID. So that radio transmits, it gets an assignment back, but then that site transmits that information, that audio, to other sites when there's a radio on that talk group, or on that site, excuse me, that's on the talk group. So to boil that down, when we have another radio that's tuned to the same talk group on, say, site 4, that radio is tuned in and that site will receive the audio from that radio. Same if the radio's on site 3. There's an example up here in the upper right on site 2 that there's not a radio listening to that talk group on site 2. In ALMR, most of it, that site will not get that audio. It won't simply broadcast that audio in the blind. It only broadcasts that when there's actually a radio trying to receive it. So that makes a very efficient use of resources. It doesn't waste channels or frequencies or any of that infrastructure. As a side note, a lot of questions get brought up about scanning and why scanning works differently. And that's part of the reason is that unlike analog, where it's just broadcasting everything, a trunk system doesn't do that. It's only going to the places where it actually needs to go. There is one exception that I'll point out if we have anybody on the call from Anchorage. The AWARN system, the Anchorage part of that system, works differently than this, where it does something called simulcast. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but that's basically how a network system works. And this is how we can use the ALMR sites, and you can talk to somebody on your talk group that might be quite a bit distant, even in a different city or different part of the state. It uses that networking to be able to do that. So let's talk a little bit about the ALMR system itself. We discussed that it's a Project 25 system, which essentially means it meets public safety standards. And it's a federal, state, and municipal partnership. And we like to talk a lot about that because we have over 135 agencies on the system as of right now, with about 27,000 different radios that are actually on the system. And what's really unique about the ALMR system is that partnership, when we talk about federal, state, municipal, isn't always replicated in other states. And our system, in fact, has quite a bit of DoD presence, Department of Defense, from our Air Force, U.S. Army, Alaska, and other DoD entities, where we actually share ownership of some sites, some of the actual physical infrastructure, and also use some of the frequencies, again, the actual part of the radio spectrum that's assigned for defense purposes. So it's a little bit of a unique, it does happen in a few other places, but it's not that common. So it's a unique partnership that we go through. And so because of that partnership, there's quite a bit of organization and governance that I don't want to spend too much time about, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how ALMR runs. And this might be a good way to be able to know who to call up if you have a question or concern. So ALMR is part of what we call Alaska Public Safety Communications Services, which is a mouthful, but that is a division under the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs for the state. And that's kind of an all-encompassing term for the folks that run the state of Alaska telecommunications system we'll talk about in a second, as well as the ALMR Operation Office, the ALMR System Office, and all of the components of that. So it's kind of under that one umbrella from a governance standpoint. The System Management Office, the SMO, and the Operations Management Office, OMO, are two different pieces of the management of the system. Mr. Conant's on the call. He is the system manager, and the system management group is primarily responsible for the technical details of the system, whereas operations management is more about governance and working with members and being their advocate to the system management office and to other stakeholders. That partnership, so think back to that partnership. So operations management does a lot of work in that realm. There's two bodies that govern ALMR. One is the User Council, which is the name implies, talks about representing the users, and that's broken up by geography. And then the Executive Council, which has representation from some of the folks you see in the key partners bullet, the state, the DoD, the Alaska Municipal League, and the municipality of Anchorage. And they're the high-level oversight for the system. But most of the day-to-day operations are in the System Management and Operations Management Office. So it's a little bit complicated with governance, but I just wanted to introduce some of that to you. So when we talk about how ALMR is built, we build this out into 4 different zones. So you might hear this referred to where Zone 1 is defined as all areas south of the Denali Highway, and Zone 2, all areas north. So there's different controllers for those and different things that we'll look at. Zone 3 is not active right now, but was set up in the past, possible for expansion in Southeast Alaska. There are some sites there now, but they are part of Zone 1. And Zone 4 is that Anchorage wide area radio network that I talked about. When we talk about a master site for these zones, they're located in Anchorage for Zone 1 and 4, and then up north, Zone 2 is located in Fairbanks. So within the zones, we have the ALMR sites. And again, when we talk about sites, we're talking about usually a tower that's connected to the ALMR network. So right now, there's about 85 tower sites, and some of these are towers that are on the road system. Many of them are mountaintop sites or inaccessible sites that are on high ground. There's a couple on buildings, but basically, this is the physical infrastructure that the subscriber units talk to. And they're connected via something called the State of Alaska Telecommunications System, or SATS. And what SATS does is it provides the network, if you remember that diagram I showed a minute ago, where all of these sites are able to communicate with each other and then back to the master sites, which are the controllers of the system. So this is, again, how you can create this wide area radio network using this infrastructure. And this infrastructure was in place before ALMR existed, but it has expanded to provide service for ALMR. And there's actually an upgrade in progress now that affects some of that structure as well. So these are generally, that network is generally owned by the state and is usually done via microwave connections. Microwave connections are basically point-to-point connections. If you have a wireless internet at your home, it's kind of the same concept where one antenna is talking to another antenna, and that may go down the road system or may take different routes. So that's how that works. And SATS is a very robust public safety grade backbone to this ALMR system. So in some senses, they're interchangeable, but they are actually a little bit different. So I wanted to point that out. The picture that you might be seeing here on your screen is an example of a mountaintop site. The big round dishes that you're seeing are part of that microwave network. And then you see the actual antennas there on the top where the technician is replacing one. This was taken during our upgrade this past summer, where actually the radios, the subscriber units, talk to. All of our sites have emergency power. Most all of them feature redundant network connections. And what I mean by that is there's usually more than one path to get to that particular site. So if there's something like a natural disaster or something that may be taking some sites offline, it can usually go another direction. That's not true for every site, but that is a goal that the state has been working towards. And I just wanted to provide this example of a map. So this is just a piece of the system map. There's a lot on here, but if you look at the stars, that's where the ALMR sites are located up here. This is around Delta Junction, over to past Hope, over to the border. So you can see even just in this one piece of the state, which definitely represents a large area, there's quite a number of sites that are required to provide the coverage that people need. And when we talk about coverage, show this map here. This map is a little bit out of date, but it does show essentially the areas of the state that are covered by ALMR. It was meant during its build out to really get as much on the road system and the higher population areas. You'll notice right now Southeast Alaska isn't fully covered, Western Alaska isn't covered. Those are hopefully infrastructure that's going to be able to happen in the future, but at this point, the majority of ALMR is with the population base and through the road system. So that talks a little bit about the system itself and kind of how it's designed. We'll get into a little bit more of some of those technical things. But I do want to pause just for a second here and see if anybody has any questions that you can put in the chat or use the raise hand function on how ALMR is built out and what that infrastructure looks like before we talk into a little bit more depth. And I'm going to continue on with this next section. And what we wanted to do with this next section, especially for folks that are a little bit new to the job or have not used some of these features, is just talk a little bit about some of the features on the dispatch consoles. This will be on what we call the MCC 7500, which most of our dispatch centers use, but there are some dispatch centers that may have different versions of these consoles. So keep in mind that your console may look different, and that depends on how your agency has programmed it and what features you're using. So I just want to go through a basic refresher here real quick of this. Starting with kind of the easy ones, and we talk about radio resources. So resource is what we refer to anything that might be on your console, like a talk group or conventional channel, even a paging resource. That in the console is called resource. And when you select that, one of the big issues or big differences for our console operators is where that audio is going. So remember, typically you have two speakers in your console, one for selected audio. So in this case, selected is highlighted with the green. So the talk group called Demo 3 would come through that selected speaker. In some cases where you use headsets, that may come through your headset audio as well. Whereas if there was traffic on Demo 2 or Demo 1 or any of the other talk groups or frequencies, you would have that come through your unselected speakers. So that's obviously the main difference there when you're dealing with these things. Some consoles may have push-to-talk buttons or foot switches or other accessories, and typically those work on the selected channel as well. Each resource has a down arrow that you'll see, which lets you expand that resource window and has a few other options in here. So I've taken this example here and expanded that where I've got the ability to adjust the volume, which is that slider. And then to the right of the slider is the clear or encryption option, clear or secure option for that. Many times this is a good troubleshooting where perhaps if something has been selected as encrypted, but people aren't using encryption on that top group, or maybe the console was restarted, that might have to get reselected. If you can't hear somebody that's keying up, or they can't hear you, if you use encryption in that, oftentimes encryption is the solution. So it's also likely that, depending again how radios are programmed, that your first responder may have gone over to encryption or clear when they meant the other. So that's a good troubleshooting tip to be sure that your encryption is selected in the right place for the right talk group. We also have the emergency alarm, channel lock, and some of the last couple calls on push to talk and that log underneath that resource channel. So there's some additional options that you may have to use from time to time when you expand that resource. I don't have a live version of this, so apologies for the pictures, but I wanted to just point out that sometimes when you expand that resource, you may have the ability to select different frequencies or different tones, which is what these two pictures represent. That's not usually something that happens on a digital talk group, but I wanted to make that note that there certainly are dispatch centers that are using conventional systems for some agencies. So as an example, that conventional system may have a backup repeater where you would have to switch to that backup repeater manually. And not something that usually is done, but something that may be particular to your particular agency's setup. So I wanted to point that out to you. The activity log on the console is a very useful resource for a lot of reasons, and that's a window that's typically floating depending where you have it located. It can look a little bit different than what is on this slide, but it gives you a recap of some of the latest traffic. So you can tell where, who talked, who keyed up, who talked on what talk group, those types of things. I point out the activity log because when we look at being able to report issues and helping the system management office track down questions and things like that, it's often very useful to have the radio alias or the radio ID, and this is a good place to get that. If it was a recent transmission, you can also look down at the expand the resource like we just looked at. But again, yours may have different information. This one shows both the talk group, the alias, which talk group it's on, and the radio ID number. So if you look in that center console that just has the numbers, so looking at the top beginning in 215, that's actually the actual radio ID number that's being shown. Many of you may not have that. You may just have the alias or the name of the radio. There's a couple different tools that you can use to make your life easier and to make things happen. So one of those is the multi-select. So usually on the right-hand side of your dispatch console, you're going to see multi-selects and patches in that window that's highlighted in green. Just wanted to point out the difference between the two. So a multi-select allows you to essentially put different talk groups or different resources in a group, and you can transmit on them simultaneously. So as an example, if you're having to dispatch a call for service to multiple agencies, say for example, police and fire at the same time, if you want to get something like an MVC or something out, this might be a way to do that, depending on how your dispatching protocol is. So a multi-select group can be set up. If you look at the three green boxes in the multi-select group, the button on the left, if you click on that and then click on the resources you want to add to the multi-select group, those resources will list inside that green box. So in this example, we've got the demo 1 and demo 2 talk group. And then if I click that green button again, that will lock that group into place. So you can utilize that multiple times. There's also the option for a patch. And a patch works on the console a similar way, but what it does is it lets the different frequencies talk to each other. It basically creates a gateway or a patch between two frequencies, or two talk groups, or two resources. Where this is important is the difference between a patch and a multi-select is that your field responders in a multi-select group can't hear anybody in the other group. So if you had a multi-select group with a police department and a fire department, they're still only able to talk to you, even though you are able to dispatch out to both of them at the same time. A patch is the opposite of that, where if I patched a police department and a fire department together, they could both talk to each other as well as you being able to talk to them. So this is something that may happen from time to time. There are patches in the system that do things like take a talk group, remember the digital version, and take a conventional repeater and put it together. Sometimes that's because of fire department paging. Sometimes that's to extend the area beyond a conventional repeater. Maybe that's because some of the responders are transitioning to ALMR. They may not all have ALMR radios. There's a couple different reasons for that. And typically, the system management office, the help desk, can help with questions on patches and those types of things. But there are some patches that may happen in the background that you don't see on your consoles, although we've been trying to get away from that for a couple of years. And there's patches there on your console itself. So you can't see, if you see on this screen here, if you can see the patches, there's dots by patch 3, patch 5, patch 1. That indicates those patches are active, that something is there. So keep in mind patches that you are basically putting these resources together. People are going to be able to talk. It might get unwieldy from an operational standpoint. So certainly check with your dispatch center supervisor, your governance about what your policy is for doing patches. But it is a function on the system. It kind of works the same way. I've set this one up, again, by kind of clicking that 4 square button and selecting which groups that I want in it, Demo 1 and Demo 2 in this case. And you can see if you look over to the left-hand side, if you look at those talk groups, they have that patch icon put in there to remind you that that patch is active. I'm afraid I didn't have a picture for this, but there are usually, in some cases, auxiliary inputs and outputs. These are small white buttons. They can be labeled pretty much anything that might do different things. So very common auxiliary input is maybe you have a fire station door that you can control from your console, or some other type of other device that you can deal with. So depending on how they're configured, they can act in different ways, whether you have to hold them down or whether you can just click them once. So just something to note there. I do want to point out here, thanks Travis putting in the chat, as we go back to the patches, they use double the site resources and can cancel out multi-group functionality. So be aware if you're patching things with a multi-group, an MG talk group, they also use quite a bit of system resources. So there's definitely things to be cognizant of when you are doing a patch. Again, check with the help desk or check with your agency's policy, because that may not be something that really is an ideal solution to the issue, and there might be ways that we can assist you with that. Talk a little bit about the emergency alarm. This is called a couple different things. Some people call it the man down alarm, the E button. There is an E button policy and procedure. Highly encourage folks, if you are representing agencies, to read that procedure as it relates to programming your E button. But typically, this is the orange button on the radio. Different radios have different things. If you look at this picture on the left that I have, you see the orange button. You also see the light next to it lit up because I've activated the emergency button. Different radios will do different things depending on how they're programmed. So if you set off your emergency button, your emergency squawk, however you refer to it, the way this radio is programmed is that light comes on, and you can see on the right-hand side, the screen has changed to emergency. Some agencies may not have any visual indication. This one will give a beep, give a little alarm when you do it. Some radios may not do that. Some radios may. It depends how they're programmed. So once you have an emergency squawk that's set off, it usually will go on the top group where that radio is tuned to. So when you see the alarm, it'll typically be on your console. It'll look a little bit like this. It's going to flash red and green, give you a very, very distinctive alert audibly. So when you see that and you see that talk group, the first thing that you're going to look at is right there in the middle. Look at your radio alias. Which radio has set that squawk off? And that's going to give you a little bit of a clue as to where that's coming from and what talk group, obviously. This may vary a little bit depending on your dispatch center's procedures, but typically, if you expand that talk group, you're going to have a box pop up, which will give again the alias. So in this case, the alias in this screen is OMO Dan. That's what the radio is called. But you'll also see to the right, this one is also showing the radio ID itself. There's a couple keys down at the bottom there. So the kind of the red cross is your acknowledge button. So if you hit that acknowledge button, that will silence the alarm on your console and allow you to investigate whatever this is, do a welfare check or follow your agency's procedure for responding to an alarm. The next button there that you can see on the right, once you click that acknowledge button, it becomes active. Where it's got that stop sign next to the red cross. That's going to be your knockdown key. So if the alarm is resolved, typically that's when you'll hit the knockdown button, and that will clear the alarm from the log. You'll notice in your activity log, the radio that's transmitting with an emergency alarm will usually be in red. And again, depending on your agency's procedures will depend on when you silence and actually knock down an emergency alarm. So typically, this is typically used in law enforcement type radios. However, some fire radios may have this, and it just again depends on your particular protocol as to how you're going to handle these types of things and what your procedure is. But on the console itself, it is that two-step process, both silencing it and knocking it down. So I want to pause here before we go to the next section here. We're getting into some of our last sections, and ask if there's any questions regarding the console operation or anything that I can clarify. Again, feel free to use the raise your hand function on Microsoft Teams, or feel free to just type a question in chat, and I'll pause for just a moment, see if anybody has any questions. And I'll go ahead and go to our next section here and kind of talk about different radio issues that you may see as a telecommunicator and what some of those causes might be and ways to resolve them. So one of the most common questions we get is the bonk. Highly technical term, but we all use it. And if you're on your console and hearing that, or whether you're in the field, it might be generally two different things. But basically, when you can't transmit, you'll get that bonk sound as opposed to the normal chirp that we might be used to. So this usually happens if the radio is out of range and it can't affiliate, it can't communicate with a site, or it could be that that site is too busy to accept radio traffic. And so this is where we talk about capacity of our sites. So I've got an illustration up there from one of our sites, and you can hopefully see the 5 boxes. So when we talk about a channel, that's how many radios can be talking at one time from one site. Each site has a control channel, and a control channel is what handles that affiliation. So if you remember, that data going back and forth happens on the control channel. This site here is a 5-channel site. So essentially, when we take the control channel out of the mix, there's 4 channels left for users. If the channels are full, you'll get a site busy, you'll get that bonk. We do certainly have busies in the system. I don't have the numbers up here, but I want to say for the last month, throughout the month, we had about, I'm going to say 300 to 350 busies in the system. In my experience, and this is not always true, but in my experience, the bonk is usually a little bit more related to range or where the radio is positioned, that I'll get to in a second. But certainly sites can be busy, and we review those and look for trends and some of those things quite often, weekly in fact. So that's typically what you're looking at. Sometimes you get a bonk, especially as a radio user, where there's nothing going on, and you wonder, well, you know, why did that happen? And remember, there's usually traffic on a site that you can't hear, and this is something oftentimes, you know, maybe our police department says, well, there's nothing going on. Well, maybe there's a fire, you know, going on in that same geographic area that the fire department is doing a lot of traffic for. So it is something to remember that a busy can happen, even though necessarily there might not be something going on in your dispatch center. It depends on a number of site conditions. So when we talk about trunking, and the diagram we used for our networked trunk system, when we talk about trunking, that's the ability for one site to reach other radios and other sites. So in our example, we were using that network trunking. We're always what we call wide trunking, unless there's an issue. So wide trunking is where, you know, perhaps a site up in the Matsu Valley is somebody on that radio is talking on a talk group to somebody, say, in the Kenai Peninsula. You know, that wide trunking is what allows those two sites to communicate. But there is a mode called site trunking, and this can happen when a particular site, particular geographic site, has lost connection with the network for whatever reason. So this might be something that is a disruption to the network. It might be, you know, something else that happened. It's not terribly common, but it certainly can happen from time to time. When radios go into site trunking, typically radios will show an indication. When you're in site trunking, that means that you can only talk to, as a field responder, only talk to the radios that are affiliated to that particular site. So if my radio is talking to the Alcantara site, for instance, I can only talk to other radios that were already on that site or affiliated with that site. That generally means I cannot talk back to dispatch because that wide area trunking, that wide network is gone. Depending upon how the radio is programmed, people might get an indication. So this is a portable radio, and my indication here is the screen has changed to say site trunking. Some radios have an alarm, an actual beep that goes off about every minute or so. Mobile radios typically turn orange. This one doesn't, but again, depending how it's programmed, your responders may see their site trunking. That typically means that you've lost communication with those folks. So that might be something where you might have a plan for an alternate group or some other way of communicating, but it's important to remember that most users don't really know what site trunking means. So I want to make sure that this is clear, that it definitely has cut off their ability to talk back to you as dispatch. So if they're calling you on the phone, that's what that looks like. And if something is in site trunking, absolutely reach out to the help desk, let them know. That usually does alarm for us, but we want to know that right away so we can resolve that issue. So talking a little bit about radios themselves, these subscriber units. So the two main types of units that you're going to be looking at are portables and mobiles. When we talk about portables and mobiles, portable is obviously the handheld radio. It's on somebody's belt, it's in somebody's hand. Where a mobile is when we talk about the vehicle-mounted radios. The big difference on those radios is how much power they're using to reach the system. So this dramatically affects coverage. I've got some figures on there. So a portable radio typically uses 6 watts of power to transmit, whereas a vehicle-mounted mobile radio may have 55 watts. So you can obviously tell the difference in being able to reach the site, being able to reach the ALMR site that it's talking to. There's a significant difference there. One thing that most people aren't real aware of is how the ALMR system was designed. And it was typically designed for mobile coverage. And so this is definitely something that we hear a lot of, where a portable doesn't work in this particular area, or there's not great coverage. And that's one of the first questions that really needs to be asked is, are you on a portable or are you on a mobile? Because a portable radio, quite frankly, is going to work generally less effectively than a mobile when we talk about coverage. Now, there are some changes to that that have been forthcoming. Some coverages actually may have recently changed because some sites got antenna upgrades as part of our system upgrade that's in progress right now. That hopefully has changed some of the footprint of that. But in general, you know, that's what you're going to be looking at, is if you can't reach the site on a portable, it is very likely you can reach that site on a mobile. And we certainly recognize that for some smaller agencies, some small fire departments, for instance, they may not have a large amount of mobiles. They might be using portables for a lot of those things. And so that's when we get into communications planning and some of the things that are a little bit beyond the scope of this training, as far as when to use portables, maybe if you're using a simplex channel for fireground, some of those things. So I just want folks to be aware of the difference between those two radios. So when we talk about affiliation to a site, remember that when a radio gets into range of a particular ALMR site, it's going to affiliate. And it works in the same way as your cell phone does, which is while somebody is traveling around, it goes to the site that has a stronger signal. So there's a little diagram in here, and just ignore the X's and the P's here. I took this from a technical journal, but basically, as your radio travels and you get further away from site 1, you're getting closer to site 2. There's a point there where the radio signal drops off in the strength through site 1, but site 2 can pick it back up. And that's generally what we see here when people move around the system, is that the radio will continuously check that and move around and try and go on to the strongest site. Sometimes with portables, if you're in weak areas, it may be trying to affiliate with different sites. It can cause a momentary bonk, but typically it works just like your cell phone, where the system tracks where that radio is, and it tries to use the strongest site that it can, the strongest signal. So when we talk about a digital system like ALMR, the audio is definitely a little bit different. So if you were working on a conventional system, an older repeater, you might be able to tell that somebody was keying up. You might be hearing some static. Maybe you get a couple words out of that. When we talk about ALMR and digital radios, we generally get in kind of an all or nothing. So typically, if you see that last diagram, the signal strength is there until it's not. It doesn't generally fade out or get worse. Typically, what we hopefully will see is that the next site will take that up, but we know there are fringe areas and other areas where audio, again, related to coverage, is going to be an issue for us. I know that you probably, as dispatchers, know where a lot of those areas are in your jurisdiction. So when we deal with coverage issues, this is probably one of the main things that we get in ALMR staff is there's no coverage here, or we need to improve coverage in this place. And one of the things we do as part of our governance is every year we look at those areas and we ask folks to report those issues. So we certainly encourage, especially if you're seeing an area that's different, that maybe was poor, now it's a little bit better, that might be related to the upgrade. If some coverage has changed, that might be an indication of something. We certainly encourage people to report that to us. But generally, portables will see diminished coverage, like we've talked about before. They don't have quite the power. It's a little bit different profile for them. Where the ALMR sites are, what kind of antennas they're using, the location, interference, and those things also can cause coverage issues. It's a very well planned out system as far as being able to use the maximum amount of coverage, and again, it's using good equipment, but there are issues that do come into play. Some of the more common things that we see is how users actually use their radio dramatically affects coverage. Believe it or not, even holding a portable radio, they're designed to work with the antenna vertical, the antenna sticking straight up, even turning them sideways, that a lot of people, including me, tend to do, very much changes how portables work. Where your portable is it in a belt on a law enforcement officer versus is it in somebody's turnout gear up near the top is also a little bit different. Radio programming isn't generally standardized throughout the ALMR system. Each individual agency can do radio programming. Sometimes the way the radio is programmed, it might have difficulty with affiliating to a particular site. There are some features that maybe have preferred sites and things. Generally, those are not necessary to use, but they can definitely cause coverage issues. So how that radio is programmed, and finally, how the unit is maintained. There's definitely some agencies that are very good at maintaining their radio and tuning them, but if those radios haven't gone through a preventative maintenance cycle, they can absolutely see degradation. Generally, what happens is radios bounce down the road or they're on somebody's belt. They may get a little bit out of tune. Essentially, what that means is they're not transmitting right on the exact right frequency anymore. It drifts a little bit. And again, that also can cause coverage issues. So the ALMR help desk is definitely available to help troubleshoot some of this, but it may require that agency's radio programmer or other person that does some of this on that side to help troubleshoot that as well. Now, our last section here as we wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about system maintenance. Hopefully most of you see our daily report that comes from the ALMR help desk Monday through Friday. And we also send out notifications when there's scheduled or unscheduled maintenance at a specific site. And that will hopefully let you know where you might see issues or communicate that with your first responders. So if you don't get that report, you can contact the help desk, or it may be going to another email address. Certainly encourage folks to keep an eye on the scheduled maintenance and other issues that are coming through. We perform preventative maintenance on every site at least once per year. So as we're going through upgrades this year and next year, there may be additional site visits and downtime, but usually for preventative maintenance, we try and have that downtime to about 15 minutes or less. You will receive a call from our help desk before we take a site down, always. And what we're doing there is we want to make sure you don't have a big incident or something that's very complex happening that we need to take a break from and make sure that you can get that finished before we take a site down. So we try to be very cognizant of that. So please expect our call to your dispatch center when that happens. And just let us know if something needs to hold off. Just keep us informed, and we'll work with you the best we can. There's another type of maintenance that happens quarterly. It's what's called our zone controller. So our zone controller is a part of the master site, and there's actually 2 zone controllers. And the best way I can describe a zone controller is it's basically the brains of the system. It's taking care of the radio traffic, it's routing things where they need to be. But they get patches, just like you patch your computer, quarterly. So because that piece of equipment is so critical, what we do is we patch one zone controller at a time, and then we roll it over to the other controller. So what happens when we call it a zone controller rollover or something like that is we're taking the active controller that's in place, that's working right now, and we're basically rolling that over to the next one. Generally, this happens. We usually try and do this every quarter on a Wednesday and a Thursday at about 5 a.m. You'll again get phone calls from us. Are we good to do our zone controller rollover? Again, let us know if there's any issue, if we need to hold, and we'll hold that. Hopefully, you don't see much downtime with that. Usually less than a minute. Sometimes it flips up and flips down. Hopefully, you don't see any of that at all. Sometimes it just goes through without anything. When we do have issues, especially when you notice things, quite frankly, a lot of times we don't get some of the information at the ALMR staff, and we can't really help diagnose anything if we don't know about it. So we certainly encourage you to reach out to us and report things to us. We have the ALMR help desk is available during business hours. It's also available for any emergencies. So please feel free to call that number if you need us. We also have the State of Alaska team, a Motorola team that backs us up. Again, any emergency issue, please feel free to be routed to the on-call technologist. Just call that help desk number. What's very helpful for us when reporting issues, especially things like coverage or radios not working properly, if you can help us with some of the information on your screen, it also helps the system technologist to look into the system and try and find what happened. So typically the most critical is date and time. If you have the ID number or the alias of the radio, that's critical. That really does help us do that. If you know the location or which site it was affiliated with, that's also helpful. What happened and any commonalities. Does your issue always happen at this particular time of day or in this particular location or maybe with this kind of radio? You as dispatchers may not always know that, but that's great information to help us out. So we certainly appreciate being able to get that information from you. If you have logs, all of that, we'll gladly take that by email, and that really helps to get through some things. And just recently, in fact, some of that information we had to dig in fairly deep to diagnose some things, and so that was very, very helpful. So that is really the end of our training presentation. I know we're getting up to an hour, but I just wanted to leave the slide up here that has the help desk number. If you don't have this, please be sure to note down the number and the email address. If there's anything that we can help with, or bigger questions on the system, questions on this training, my phone number and email address are also there. I'm going to put a link to an evaluation form for this training in the chat. If everybody wouldn't mind, just grab that. It should take you about 2 minutes to fill that out, but we certainly appreciate your feedback. And I'm going to pause here now for questions. If there's any questions that we can answer, we have myself, we've got some of our system manager on the line. So if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or shout them out or put them in chat while I put this evaluation link in. The training evaluation link is in the chat, so I don't see any hands raised. I'm going to give it here just 2 more minutes for questions, and I'm happy to answer any of those that you may have. And for those folks that are watching the recording, certainly reach out with the contact information that's on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll be around here for a few more minutes for anybody that has questions. Thank you so much for attending, and certainly appreciate your feedback and evaluation for this training.